The instructors mocked her. Then her record unlocked the vault. Every species in the galaxy had something special. The Dralki could bend metal with their minds. The Voranth could survive in the vacuum of space without suits. The Thessari could calculate faster than any computer ever built. And humans? The galaxy looked at humans and saw nothing. Soft skin, weak bones, short lives, no natural weapons, no telepathy, no armor, nothing. That is what every alien believed when they first met a human. That is also why every alien who ever underestimated a human lived to regret it, because humans carried something inside them that no scanner could detect, no test could measure, and no instructor could train into another species. They carried fire. Not the kind you could see, the kind that refused to go out. This is the story of one human girl who walked into the most elite military academy in the known galaxy, got laughed at by every instructor in the building, and then did something that no one in 10,000 years had been able to do. She opened a door that the entire galaxy had given up on. But before we get there, you need to understand something. You need to understand just how badly they wanted her to fail. The shuttle dropped out of hyperspace above the planet Corvan 7, and Kira Vasquez pressed her face against the cold window to get her first look at the place that would either make her career or destroy it. Corvan 7 was not a beautiful planet. It was grey and brown and covered in sharp mountain ranges that cut across the surface like old scars. The sky was a dull orange, thick with dust that never settled. There were no oceans, no forests, no soft places anywhere. The planet looked like it had been designed by someone who hated comfort. And in many ways, that was exactly what had happened. The Galactic Coalition had chosen this planet 3,000 years ago as the site for the Apex Military Academy specifically because it was miserable. The idea was simple. If you could survive Corvan 7, you could survive anything. Kira pulled back from the window and looked at her reflection. She was 22 years old. Medium height, brown skin, dark hair pulled back tight. Her eyes were the only thing about her that stood out. They were a strange shade of amber, almost golden in certain light. She had gotten them from her mother, who had gotten them from her mother before that. Back on Earth, people sometimes told her that her eyes looked like they were on fire. Here, surrounded by aliens who could shoot lightning from their fingertips or see through walls, golden eyes meant nothing. She checked her bag one more time. Inside was everything she owned. 2 sets of standard training clothes, a datapad loaded with academy regulations, a small photograph of her family that she had printed on actual paper because she liked the feel of it, and a letter from Admiral Chen, the only human officer in the Coalition fleet who held a rank above captain. The letter was short. It said, "You are the 7th human to be accepted to Apex Academy. The first 6 did not finish. Do not be the 7th to fail. We need this." No pressure, Kira thought. The shuttle landed with a heavy thud that rattled her teeth. The door opened and hot, dry air rushed in, carrying the smell of dust and something metallic she could not identify. She grabbed her bag and walked down the ramp into the blinding orange light of Corvan 7. The landing platform was massive. It could have held 100 shuttles easily, but there were only about 40 today, and from each one, candidates were stepping out and looking around with the same mixture of excitement and terror that Kira felt in her own chest. She could see Dralki with their tall, thin bodies and silver skin, Voranth with their 4 arms and thick armored plates, Asari with their large heads and small bodies, their multiple eyes blinking in the dust. There were species she recognized from her studies and species she had never seen before. All of them looked powerful. All of them looked like they belonged here. And then there was her, the human, the soft one. She felt their eyes on her immediately. Not all of them, but enough. A group of Voranth candidates standing near the edge of the platform turned to look at her, and one of them made a sound that her translator chip rendered as laughter. A Thessari walking past her slowed down, scanned her with 3 of its 5 eyes, and then sped up again as if it had seen something disappointing. Kira kept walking. She had been warned about this. Admiral Chen had told her that the other species would not take her seriously. Humans had only been part of the Galactic Coalition for 40 years. In galactic terms, that was nothing. Most species had been members for thousands of years. Humans were the newcomers. The babies. The species that still got lost in hyperspace and accidentally started wars because they could not read basic galactic body language. She followed the signs toward the main academy building, a massive structure built into the side of a mountain. It was grey like everything else on this planet, but it had a kind of brutal beauty to it. The walls were smooth and curved, designed to withstand the planet's frequent dust storms. The entrance was a single doorway, wide enough for the larger species but somehow still intimidating. Above the door, carved into the stone in 100 different languages, was the Academy motto. Kira's translator chip processed it and fed the words into her ear. Weakness is a choice. Strength is earned. She walked through the door and into a long corridor that was cooler than outside but still warm. Her footsteps were silent. Ahead of her, the corridor opened into a vast hall where hundreds of candidates were gathering. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, stood a row of figures in dark uniforms, the instructors. Kira found a spot near the back of the crowd and tried to make herself small. She studied the instructors on the platform. There were 12 of them, each one from a different species. She recognized most of the species from her studies. The one in the center, the one who looked like he was in charge, was a Dralki. He was tall, even for his kind, with silver skin that seemed to glow faintly in the hall's dim light. His eyes were pure black, no whites at all, and they moved across the crowd with the cold precision of a predator scanning for prey. His name, she would learn later, was Commander Vorath Sen, and he had been running the academy for over 200 years. In that time, he had trained thousands of soldiers who went on to serve in the Coalition fleet. He had also expelled thousands more who did not meet his standards. His standards were, by all accounts, almost impossible to meet. Commander Sen raised one hand, and the entire hall went silent. Not just quiet, silent, as if every being in the room had simultaneously stopped breathing. You are here because someone, somewhere, decided that you might be worthy of wearing the uniform of the Galactic Coalition's elite forces, he said. His voice was smooth and cold, like metal being dragged across ice. I want to be clear about something. That person was probably wrong. Statistics tell us that 60% of you will not survive the first month. Of those who remain, half will be gone by the end of the first year. Only the best of what is left will graduate. The rest will go home with nothing but the memory of their failure. He paused and let the words settle over the crowd like a weight. The training you will undergo here is designed to push you past every limit you think you have. Mental, emotional. We will find your breaking point, and then we will push you past it. If you break, you go home. If you bend, you might survive. If you refuse to do either, then maybe, just maybe, you belong here. His black eyes swept the crowd again, and for one terrible moment, Kira felt certain that they stopped on her, that he saw her standing there at the back, the only human in the room, and that he had already decided she was not worth his time. The moment passed. Commander Sen continued his speech, outlining the rules and structure of the academy. Training would begin at dawn. There would be no days off, no breaks, no second chances. If you failed an evaluation, you were given one opportunity to repeat it. If you failed again, you were done. When the speech ended, the candidates were divided into training groups. There were 20 groups of 20, each one assigned to a specific instructor. Kira was assigned to Group 7, under the supervision of an instructor named Drill Master Kethis. Kethis was a Voranth, which meant he was massive. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, had 4 arms, and was covered in natural armor plating that looked like it could stop a plasma bolt. His face was flat and wide, with small eyes set deep under a heavy brow ridge. When he smiled, which he did often, it was not a friendly expression. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed watching others suffer. Group 7 gathered in a training room that was essentially a large empty space with high ceilings and a hard floor. Kira looked around at her group mates. There were Dralki, Voranth, Thesari, and a few species she did not recognize. She was the only human. She was also the smallest person in the room by a significant margin. Drill Master Kethis walked in and stood at the front of the group. He held a datapad in one of his 4 hands and began reading names. As he read each name, the candidate would step forward, and Kethis would look them over with his small, calculating eyes. When he got to Kira's name, he paused. He looked at the datapad. Then he looked at her. Then he looked at the datapad again, as if checking to make sure there had not been a mistake. Kira Vasquez, he said slowly, his deep voice rumbling like something heavy being dragged across stone. Human. Yes, sir, Kira said. Kethis stared at her for a long moment. Then he made a sound that her translator chip could not quite process. It was somewhere between a sigh and a growl. Step forward, human. Kethis looked down at her. Way down. It was more than twice her height. "Do you know how many humans have attended this academy?" he asked. "6 before me, sir." "And do you know how many of those 6 graduated?" Kira swallowed. "None, sir." "None," Kethis repeated, and this time his voice carried a note of something that might have been amusement, or might have been contempt. It was hard to tell with Vorath. The longest any human lasted was 4 months. That was 3 years ago. A male. He was strong for a human, I am told. He broke his leg during a mountain run and could not continue. Humans are fragile. Your bones are hollow compared to most species. Your muscles are small. Your skin is thin. You have no natural armor, no natural weapons, no enhanced senses. Frankly, I am not sure why the Academy continues to accept your kind." He said all of this in a flat, matter-of-fact tone, as if he were reading from a scientific report rather than insulting her species to her face. The other candidates in the group were watching. Some of them were trying to hide their amusement. Others were not bothering to try. Kira stood there and took it. She had been warned about this, she reminded herself. Admiral Chen had told her that the instructors would try to break her spirit before they even started on her body. "They will say things that make you want to scream," the Admiral had said. "Let them. Save your screaming for the training." "I understand, sir," Kira said. "I am here to prove that assessment wrong." Kethis looked at her with something that might have been surprise, or might have been annoyance. "We will see," he said. Then he moved on to the next name. The first day of training was a physical assessment. Every candidate had to complete a series of tests designed to establish their baseline capabilities: running, lifting, climbing, swimming, combat, endurance. Each test was scaled to the individual species, but the results were ranked on a universal scale that allowed direct comparison between species. This, Kira knew, was where things were going to get ugly. And they did. In the running test, she finished last in her group. Not by a little, by a lot. The Dralki candidates could run at speeds that made her feel like she was standing still. The Voranth was slower but had a stamina that let them maintain a brutal pace indefinitely. Even the small-bodied Thessari, who she had hoped might be slower than her, had cybernetic enhancements in their legs that gave them bursts of incredible speed. Kira ran as hard as she could and finished more than 2 minutes behind the next slowest candidate. In the lifting test, she could barely move weights that the Voranth candidates tossed around with one arm. In the climbing test, she did reasonably well, using her flexibility and her ability to find handholds that the larger species could not use, but she was still in the bottom third of the group. In the combat test, she was paired against a Dralki candidate who was nearly a meter taller than her and had telekinetic abilities. The fight lasted 11 seconds. Kira spent 9 of those seconds on the floor. By the end of the day, her ranking in Group 7 was dead last, 20th out of 20. The datapad on the wall of the training room displayed the rankings in bright, cold numbers for everyone to see. There was her name at the bottom, with a score so low it almost seemed like a joke. That night, in the small room she had been assigned in the academy barracks, Kira sat on her bed and stared at the photograph of her family, her mother and father, her younger brother, her grandmother, who was old and small and tough as steel cable. They were standing in front of their house in Bogota, squinting in the sunlight, smiling like the world was a good place. She wanted to cry. She wanted to pack her bag and get on a shuttle and go home and tell Admiral Chen that he had picked the wrong person, that she was not the one who was going to prove humanity's worth to the galaxy, that she was just a girl from Columbia who had scored well on some tests and had been foolish enough to think that meant something. But she did not cry, and she did not pack her bag. Instead, she put the photograph back in her bag, lay down on her bed, and stared at the ceiling of her tiny room until her breathing was steady and her jaw was set and the fire in her chest, that stubborn, stupid, human fire, was burning so hot she could almost feel it in her bones. Tomorrow, she would be last again, and the day after that, and the day after that. She knew this. She accepted it. But she also knew something that Commander Sen and Drill Master Kethis and every other alien in this academy did not know. She knew that being last today did not mean being last forever, because humans did something that no other species in the galaxy seemed to understand. They improved. Not a little. Not a little. They improved like fire spreading through dry grass. Give a human enough time, enough pain, enough reason to keep going, and they would become something that the galaxy had never seen before. Kira closed her eyes and let the exhaustion pull her down into sleep. Tomorrow would be worse than today. She was counting on it. The weeks that followed were exactly as brutal as Commander Sen had promised. Every morning began in darkness, long before the dull orange sun of Kovan 7 crept over the jagged mountains. A sharp alarm would cut through the barracks at 400 hours Galactic Standard Time, and every candidate had exactly 8 minutes to be dressed, standing, and ready in the training yard. Those who were late lost meal privileges. Those who were late twice were given extra punishment drills. Those who were late 3 times were expelled. Kira was never late. Not once. She had trained herself to wake up 10 minutes before the alarm, lying still in the dark, breathing slowly, preparing her body and her mind for the pain that was coming. It was a small thing, a tiny advantage. But in a place where she had almost no advantages at all, she learned to treasure the small ones. The morning training always started with a run, not a gentle jog, a full-speed run across the broken terrain surrounding the academy. The course changed every day, generated by a computer that seemed to take personal pleasure in creating the most miserable routes possible. Sometimes it was a sprint through narrow canyons filled with loose rocks. Sometimes it was a climb up a steep mountain path where the air was thin and the wind tried to tear you off the cliff face. Sometimes it was a long endurance run across flat, featureless plains where the heat shimmered off the ground like water and there was nothing to focus on except the pain in your legs and the fire in your lungs. Kira finished last every single time for the first 3 weeks. It was not even close. The gap between her and the next slowest candidate was enormous, and the gap between her and the fastest was almost embarrassing. Drill Master Kethis made sure to point this out regularly. He would stand at the finish line with his forearms crossed over his massive chest, watching as the other candidates finished and then waiting, sometimes for several minutes, for Kira to come struggling in at the end. "Ah, the human arrives," he would say, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I was beginning to think you had died out there." That would have been a lot of paperwork. The other candidates would laugh. Not all of them, but enough. A Dralki named Sareth, who was the fastest runner in the group and seemed to excel at everything without effort, had a particular talent for making cutting remarks at exactly the moment when Kira was too exhausted to respond. "Maybe we should get her a transport vehicle," Sareth said one morning as Kira crossed the finish line, bent over and gasping. "It would be more dignified than watching this." She never responded to the mockery, not because she did not feel it. She felt every word like a knife between her ribs. But she had made a decision in those first dark nights at the academy, and she held to it with the kind of stubborn determination that was, though she did not know it yet, the very thing that made humans dangerous. The decision was simple. She would not waste energy on anger. Every drop of energy she had, every heartbeat, every breath, would go toward one thing and one thing only: getting better, and she was getting better. The improvement was so small at first that nobody noticed it, not even Kira herself. But it was there, hidden in the numbers that the Academy's tracking systems recorded with cold, mechanical precision. On the first day, her average running pace was 14 minutes per kilometre over rough terrain. By the end of the first week, it was 13 minutes and 40 seconds. By the end of the second week, 13 minutes and 10 seconds. By the end of the third week, 12 minutes and 50 seconds. The numbers were still terrible by Academy standards. She was still last. But the gap was shrinking. Not quickly enough for anyone to care, but it was shrinking. The line on her performance graph, which the Academy displayed on each candidate's personal datapad, was not flat. It was tilted upward, just slightly, just enough. The physical training was only one part of the Academy curriculum. There were also tactical simulations, where candidates had to solve complex military scenarios in real time. There were weapons training sessions, where they learned to use everything from standard plasma rifles to ancient kinetic weapons, to their own natural abilities. There were survival exercises, where they were dropped into hostile environments with minimal equipment and told to stay alive for a set period of time. And there were academic classes, where they studied galactic history, military strategy, coalition law, and interspecies communication. In the tactical simulations, Kira discovered something interesting. She was not the smartest person in the room. The Thessary candidates could process information at speeds that made her head spin. They could look at a battlefield scenario and calculate optimal troop movements in seconds. But Kira found that she could do something the Thessary struggled with. She could improvise. When a simulation threw an unexpected variable into the mix, a sudden ambush, a change in terrain, a betrayal by an allied force, The Thessari candidates would often freeze for a moment, their multiple eyes blinking rapidly as they tried to recalculate. Kira did not freeze. She reacted. Not always perfectly, not always smartly, but she reacted. And in combat, a fast, imperfect decision was often better than a slow, perfect one. She also discovered that she had an unexpected talent for reading other species. Humans, she had been told many times, were social animals. They had evolved in groups, and they had developed an almost supernatural ability to read body language, detect emotions, and predict behavior. On Earth, this ability was so common that nobody thought about it. Here, surrounded by aliens whose body language was completely foreign to her, Kira found that she could still pick up on subtle cues that other species missed. A slight shift in a Dralki's posture that suggested hesitation. A change in the rhythm of a Vorant's breathing that indicated stress. A particular pattern in a Thessari's eye movements that meant they were uncertain. These were tiny signals, almost invisible, but Kira caught them, and she used them. In one tactical simulation during the 4th week, her team was pinned down in a canyon with enemy forces closing in from both sides. The team leader, a Dralki candidate named Voss, was trying to coordinate a retreat, but the enemy's movements did not make sense. They were advancing too slowly on one side and too fast on the other. The Thessari on the team ran the numbers and concluded that the slow advancing force was the main threat, that they were holding back to lure the team into a trap. Voss was about to order the team to concentrate their defense against the slow force when Kira spoke up. "It is the fast ones," she said. "The slow force is the distraction." Everyone looked at her. She was the lowest-ranked member of the team, and she was contradicting the Thessari's analysis. "Explain," Voss said, his silver face unreadable. "The fast force's movement pattern is wrong," Kira said. "They are not advancing aggressively. They are hurting us. They want us to focus on the slow force and leave our flank exposed. If we do that, the fast force will swing around and hit us from behind." There was a pause. The Thessari rechecked the numbers and admitted that the data could support either interpretation. Voss looked at Kira for a long moment, then made a decision. He split the team's defense, putting a small force against the slow advance and concentrating the rest against the fast force. Kira was right. The fast force attempted exactly the flanking maneuver she had predicted. Because the team was ready for it, they were able to hold their position and eventually push both forces back. It was the first time Group 7 had won that particular simulation scenario. After the exercise, Voss approached Kira in the corridor. He was tall and elegant as all Dralki were, and he looked at her with those pure black eyes that she still found slightly unnerving. "How did you know?" he asked. "I watched how they moved," Kira said. "It did not feel right." "It did not feel right," Voss repeated, as if tasting the words. "That is not a tactical analysis. That is intuition." "For humans, sometimes intuition is our best tactical analysis," Kira said. Voss considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly and walked away. He did not say anything else, but from that day on, he always looked at Kira before making a decision in simulations. Not to ask her opinion directly. Just to check. To see if she had noticed something that the numbers had missed. The weapons training was another area where Kira found unexpected footholds. She could not match the raw power of the Voranth, who could fire heavy weapons from the shoulder that would have knocked her flat. She could not match the precision of the Dralki, who used their telekinetic abilities to guide projectiles with terrifying accuracy. But she discovered that she had good hands. Steady hands. Hands that could hold a weapon for hours without trembling. They could adjust aim by fractions of a degree with smooth, unconscious movements. Humans, it turned out, had some of the finest motor control of any species in the galaxy. It was a leftover from their evolutionary history, from millions of years of using tools, throwing spears, threading needles, playing musical instruments. No one at the Academy talked about it because it did not show up on the standard physical assessments. But it was there, and Kira used it. With a standard plasma rifle, she went from dead last in accuracy scores to the middle of the pack within 5 weeks. With a kinetic sniper rifle, the old-fashioned kind that fired actual metal projectiles, she was even better. The recoil did not bother her. She had learned to absorb it, to let her body work with the weapon rather than against it. By the 6th week, she was in the top 5 in her group for sniper accuracy, and Drillmaster Kethis had stopped making jokes about her shooting. The survival exercises were where Kira truly began to understand what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of stronger, faster, more powerful species. The first major survival exercise took place at the end of the 5th week. Every candidate in Group 7 was dropped individually into a region of Corvan 7 known as the Shatter, a vast expanse of broken terrain filled with deep crevasses, unstable rock formations, and temperatures that swung wildly between scorching heat during the day and freezing cold at night. They had to survive for 3 days with nothing but a basic survival kit consisting of a water purifier, a thermal blanket, a knife, and a fire-starting tool. Most of the alien candidates relied on their natural abilities to survive. The Voranth, with their armored skin, barely noticed the temperature swings. The Drauki used their telekinesis to construct elaborate shelters from loose rock. The Fessari, though physically fragile, had cybernetic implants that regulated their body temperature and monitored their vital signs, allowing them to optimize their energy use with mathematical precision. Kira had none of these advantages. What she had was something she did not even have a name for at first. She later learned that the galactic scientific community had a term for it. They called it adaptive persistence. It was the ability to take a bad situation, analyze it with whatever resources were available, and then refuse to stop trying solutions until one of them worked. It was not intelligence exactly, though it required intelligence. It was not endurance, though it required endurance. It was something in between, something uniquely human. On the first night in the Shatter, the temperature dropped to -30 degrees. Kira's thermal blanket was designed for species with much higher baseline body temperatures, and it was not enough. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, slowing her thoughts, making her fingers clumsy. A lesser candidate might have activated their emergency beacon and accepted extraction. Kira did not. Instead, she dug. She used her knife to carve out a narrow trench in the rocky ground, deep enough to lie in. She lined the bottom with loose gravel, which she had noticed retained heat from the day's sun. She wrapped herself in the thermal blanket, pressed herself into the trench, and covered the top with flat rocks, leaving just enough of a gap to breathe. It was not comfortable. It was not warm. She survived the night. The second day, she found water by noticing a pattern in the way certain rock formations were weathered, a pattern that suggested underground moisture. She dug in the right spot and found a thin seam of damp earth, just enough to keep her hydrated when combined with her water purifier. On the third day, she encountered a sandstorm that came in fast and hard, reducing visibility to almost nothing. She could not see. She could not hear. She could barely breathe. She wrapped her face in a strip of fabric torn from her thermal blanket, pressed herself against a rock wall, and waited. The storm lasted 6 hours. When it passed, she was covered in a thick layer of fine dust. Her skin was raw, and her eyes were burning. But she was alive. When the extraction shuttles came, Kira was one of the last to be picked up. She was dirty, exhausted, dehydrated, and covered in small cuts and bruises. But she was standing, and she had not activated her emergency beacon. Out of the 20 candidates in Group 7, 4 had activated their beacons and been extracted early. Kira was not one of them. Drillmaster Kethis reviewed the survival exercise results in front of the group the next day. He went through each candidate's performance, noting strengths and weaknesses with his usual blunt efficiency. When he got to Kira, he paused. He looked at his datapad, then looked at her, and for the first time since the academy had started, he did not make a joke. "Vasquez," he said, "your shelter construction was crude but effective. Your water procurement was innovative. Your decision-making under pressure during the sandstorm was sound." He paused again, and his small eyes narrowed slightly. "You are still ranked last in overall physical performance, but your survival score places you 11th out of 20 in this group. 11th. Not first. Not even close to first. Out of 20. For the first time, Kira was not at the bottom of the list. She was in the middle. And in a room full of aliens who had been laughing at her for 5 weeks, being in the middle felt like a victory. That night, lying in her bunk, Kira allowed herself a small smile. Then she opened her data pad and looked at her overall performance graph. The line was still tilted upward. Still climbing. Still slow. But the angle was steeper now than it had been at the start. In running, she had cut her average pace by nearly a full minute per kilometer. In combat, she had gone from losing every match in seconds to lasting several minutes against opponents twice her size. In tactical simulations, her success rate was now above average. In weapons accuracy, she was climbing fast. None of this was enough to impress anyone. Her overall ranking was still 19th out of 20 in Group 7. The only person she had managed to surpass was a Thessary candidate named Relic, who had severe anxiety issues and kept freezing during combat exercises. But the numbers told a story that the rankings did not. The numbers showed that Kira Vasquez was improving faster than anyone else in the group. Not by a little, by a lot. Her rate of improvement, measured as the percentage gain per week across all training categories, was more than double the group average. In some categories, it was triple. The numbers were there on her datapad, cold and clear, for anyone who cared to look. Nobody was looking. Not yet. But somewhere deep in the Academy's computer systems, something was paying attention. A program that had been running silently for 10,000 years, monitoring every candidate who had ever passed through the Academy's doors, was tracking her progress. And for the first time in a very long time, the program had flagged a record for review. The flag was small, buried deep in layers of data that no one had accessed in centuries. But it was there, and it was attached to a file that bore a label that would have sent shockwaves through the entire Galactic Coalition if anyone had known about it. The label read simply, Vault Candidate, not Commander Sen, not Drill Master Kethis, not even Kira herself. But the program knew, and it was watching. Somewhere beneath the Academy, buried under a kilometer of solid rock, behind doors that had not opened in 10,000 years, something ancient was waiting. It had been waiting for a very long time. And now, for the first time in millennia, it sensed that its wait might soon be over. The Vault did not think exactly. It was not alive in any way that a biologist would recognize, but it was aware. It had been built to be aware. And what it was aware of right now was a young human woman lying in a small room in the barracks above, staring at numbers on a daypad and smiling a small, tired, defiant smile. The Vault did not smile, but if it could have, it would have. It had been waiting for exactly this kind of fire. 3 months into the Academy, something shifted. It did not happen all at once. It was not a single dramatic moment that changed everything. It was more like the turning of a tide, so slow that no one standing on the shore would notice until the water was already at their ankles. Kira Vasquez was no longer last. She had climbed to 15th in her group's overall rankings, surpassing 5 candidates who had started far ahead of her. 2 of them had dropped out entirely, broken by the relentless pace of the training. The other 3 were still there, but their performance had plateaued. They had reached the limits of their natural abilities and hit a wall. Kira had not hit any wall. She was still climbing. Still getting faster, stronger, sharper, better. Every single week, her numbers went up. The other candidates in Group 7 had started to notice. Not because they were paying attention to Kira specifically, but because it was impossible to ignore someone who kept appearing higher on the ranking board every time you checked it. The Dralki candidate Soreth, who had once joked about getting Kira a transport vehicle, stopped making those jokes after Kira beat him in a tactical simulation for the 3rd time in a row. He did not say anything about it. He just stopped talking to her altogether, which Kira considered a significant improvement. Drill Master Kethis had noticed too. His comments about Kira's performance had shifted gradually from open mockery to grudging silence to something that almost resembled respect. He still pushed her harder than anyone else in the group. He still found her weaknesses and hammered on them without mercy. But the insults about her species had stopped. In their place were the same sharp, professional criticisms he gave to every other candidate. Your footwork is sloppy, Vasquez. Fix it. Your reaction time on the left side is 0.2 of a second slower than the right. That will get you killed. Work on it. Your situational awareness in urban environments is improving, but you still telegraph your movements when you are under stress. Control your breathing. These were the kinds of criticisms that meant an instructor considered you worth training. Kira accepted each one like a gift and spent her evenings working on whatever Kethis had pointed out that day. The change in how others perceived her became most apparent during a team combat exercise in the 12th week. The exercise was a simulated assault on a fortified position. Group 7 was split into 2 teams of 10. The attacking team had to breach the fortification and capture a central objective. The defending team had to hold the position for 30 minutes. Kira was assigned to the attacking team, led by Voss, the Dralki who had started listening to her intuitions during tactical simulations. Before the exercise began, Voss gathered the team and laid out his plan. It was a standard approach, a 2-pronged assault with a diversionary force drawing fire from the front while the main assault team hit the left flank. It was a solid plan, well suited to the strengths of the team members. But when Voss finished explaining it, he looked at Kira and said something that made the rest of the team stare. "Vasquez, you are on point for the flank assault." Leading the charge. The most dangerous position, the spot usually reserved for the strongest or the most experienced candidate on the team. Several team members exchanged glances. A Voranth named Dren, who was the largest and most physically powerful member of the team, let out a low rumble of displeasure. "You want the human leading?" he asked, not bothering to hide his doubt. "I want the person who is least likely to panic leading," Bosk replied calmly. "Vasquez has the highest composure rating on this team under unexpected conditions. If the defenders have a surprise waiting for us on that flank, and they will, she will react faster and smarter than any of us." There was a heavy silence. Dren looked like he wanted to argue, but the data was the data, and Voss was right. Over the past 12 weeks, Kira had demonstrated an almost unnatural ability to stay calm and make rapid decisions when things went wrong. It was not something she had trained specifically. It was something built into her species over millions of years of evolution. Humans were pursuit predators. They had evolved to stay focused and rational during the chaos of a hunt, to keep thinking clearly even when their bodies were screaming with exhaustion and their prey was doing something unexpected. In galactic terms, this ability was rare. Most species either panicked under extreme stress or shut down emotionally, becoming cold and mechanical. Humans did neither. They got sharper. They got creative. They adapted. Kira took point. The flank assault went exactly as Voss had predicted. The defenders had set a trap, a concealed energy barrier that activated the moment the assault team rounded the corner. It was supposed to stop them cold, give the defenders time to reposition and counterattack. For most species, encountering an unexpected barrier would cause a moment of hesitation, a brief pause while the brain processed the new information and formulated a response. That pause, even if it was only a second or two, would be enough for the defenders to gain the upper hand. Kira did not pause. The moment the barrier flickered to life in front of her, she was already moving. She dropped to the ground, rolled to the right, and shouted a warning to the team behind her. In the same motion, she pulled a flash grenade from her belt and threw it, not at the barrier, but over it, aiming for where she judged the defender's position to be based on the angle of the barrier's projectors. The grenade went off with a blinding burst of light. Behind the barrier, the defenders flinched. One of them, a Thessary who was operating the barrier generator, lost concentration for just a fraction of a second. The barrier flickered. Kira saw the flicker. "Down," she shouted. And Dren, who had been right behind her, charged forward with all the force his massive Voranth body could generate. He hit the weakened barrier like a freight train and punched through it, shattering the generator. The rest of the team poured through the gap, and the assault succeeded with 2 minutes to spare. After the exercise, Dren approached Kira. He was covered in dust and breathing hard, but his small eyes held a look that she had not seen from a Voranth before. It took her a moment to recognize it. It was respect. Genuine respect. "That was fast," Dren said. "Your reaction when the barrier activated. I have served with warriors from a dozen species. I have never seen anyone respond that quickly to an unexpected threat." Kira shrugged, trying to act casual even though her heart was still pounding. "I just did not think about it." "I just moved. That is what makes it impressive," Dren said. He held out one of his 4 massive hands. Kira looked at it, then reached out and placed her small human hand against his armored palm. It was the Voranth gesture of warrior acknowledgement. She had read about it, but had never expected to receive it. Dren closed his fingers gently around her hand, careful not to crush it, and nodded once. Then he walked away, and Kira stood there for a moment, feeling something warm and fierce and good burning in her chest. Not pride exactly. Something deeper. The feeling that she was finally, after all these weeks and months of pain and mockery and exhaustion, starting to earn her place. The months continued to pass. The training grew harder, as everyone had been warned it would. The physical demands increased. The tactical scenarios became more complex. The survival exercises moved from individual challenges to team operations in environments that were genuinely life-threatening. Candidates continued to drop out. By the 6th month, Group 7 was down from 20 to 14. 6 candidates had either failed their evaluations or chosen to leave. Kira was not among them. Her ranking had climbed to 8th, then 7th. Then, in the 20th week, 6th. She was now in the top half of her group and her rate of improvement showed no signs of slowing down. The other candidates had largely stopped being surprised by her progress. Some of them had even started coming to her for advice, particularly in tactical situations where her human intuition gave her an edge that raw intelligence and physical power could not match. It was around this time that Kira first heard about the vault. She was in the Academy's library, a vast underground chamber filled with data terminals and holographic archives that contained the accumulated military knowledge of 1,000 species across 10,000 years. She was researching historical siege tactics for an upcoming simulation when she noticed a reference in one of the older archives. It was buried deep in a document about the Academy's founding, a brief mention of something called the Koravan Repository, also known as the Vault. It described the Vault as an ancient structure located deep beneath the Academy, predating the Academy itself by thousands of years. It had been discovered during the construction of the original Academy facilities and was believed to have been built by a species known only as the Architects, a civilization so old that almost nothing was known about them except that they had been extraordinarily advanced. The Architects had vanished long before any of the current galactic civilizations had developed space travel. They left behind only a handful of structures scattered across the galaxy, all of them sealed, all of them impenetrable. The vault beneath the Academy was one of these structures. According to the document, multiple attempts had been made over the centuries to open it. Everyone had failed. The vault's door was made of a material that could not be cut, melted, or broken by any known technology. There were no locks, no panels, no visible mechanisms of any kind. The door simply existed, smooth and featureless and immovable, and behind it, the galaxy believed, was something extraordinary. Knowledge, technology, weapons. Maybe all three. Maybe something nobody had even imagined. Various theories existed about how to open the vault. Some scientists believed it required a specific genetic key, a DNA sequence from the architects themselves, which was impossible since no architect remains had ever been found. Others believed it was based on psychic energy and could only be opened by a species with sufficiently powerful telepathic abilities. The Dralki, who had the strongest telekinetic abilities of any known species, had tried multiple times. They had failed. Others believed it was simply a dead structure, sealed forever, its contents lost to time. The document ended with a dry notation stating that the vault was now classified as a historical curiosity and that access to the area surrounding it was restricted to authorized personnel only. Kira read the entry twice, feeling a strange pull of curiosity that she could not quite explain. There was something about the vault that nagged at her, like a word on the tip of her tongue that she could not quite grasp. She filed the information away in her mind and went back to her siege tactics research. But the vault stayed with her, a quiet presence at the edge of her thoughts. She might have forgotten about it entirely, if it had not been for what happened 2 weeks later. It was the middle of the night, and Kira could not sleep. This was unusual for her. Despite the exhaustion of the training, she normally fell asleep within minutes of lying down, but tonight her mind was restless, turning over the details of a particularly difficult tactical simulation she had failed that afternoon. She had missed something, some crucial detail, and it was bothering her the way a splinter under the skin bothers you, invisible but impossible to ignore. She got up and decided to take a walk. The Academy's corridors were quiet at night, lit by dim emergency lighting that cast long shadows on the stone walls. She was not supposed to be out of the barracks during rest hours, but the Academy's surveillance systems were focused on the external perimeters and the training areas, not the interior corridors. She had figured this out weeks ago and had taken several late-night walks without being caught. She wandered through the familiar corridors, letting her feet carry her without any particular destination. She passed the training rooms, the lecture halls, the medical wing. She went deeper into the Academy than she had ever been before, following corridors that grew narrower and older, the smooth modern walls giving way to rough-hewn stone that looked like it had been carved centuries ago. Eventually, she came to a corridor she did not recognize. It was narrow and steep, descending at a sharp angle into the rock beneath the Academy. The lighting here was different, not the standard blue-white of the Academy's modern systems, but a warm amber glow that came from sources she could not identify. The walls were covered in markings, not writing exactly, but patterns. Geometric designs that spiraled and interlocked in ways that made her eyes ache if she tried to follow them too closely. She should have turned back. She knew that. Whatever was down this corridor was clearly not meant for candidates. But something pulled her forward. the same quiet curiosity that had gripped her when she read about the vault in the library. She descended the corridor, her bare feet making no sound on the cool stone floor. The corridor opened into a chamber. It was not large, maybe 10 meters across, with a domed ceiling that rose to a point above her head. The amber light was stronger here, emanating from the geometric patterns on the walls, which seemed to pulse faintly, like a slow heartbeat. And there, on the far wall of the chamber, was a door. Kira knew immediately that this was the vault. She did not know how she knew. There were no signs, no labels, nothing to identify it. But the door was exactly as the document had described it, smooth, featureless, made of a material that looked like dark metal, but had a depth to it, as if you could fall into it if you stared too long. It was set into the wall seamlessly, with no hinges, no frame, no visible mechanism of any kind. It was simply there. A boundary, a threshold between what was known and what was not. She stood in the chamber and stared at the door for a long time. She did not touch it. She did not try to open it. She just looked at it, and as she looked, she felt something she had never felt before. A sense of recognition, as if the door was looking back at her, and as if it knew her, not who she was now, but who she was becoming. It was a strange feeling, and it scared her a little. She turned around and walked back up the corridor, back through the winding passageways, back to her bunk in the barracks. She lay down and closed her eyes, and this time she fell asleep immediately. She did not tell anyone about what she had found, not Voss, who had become something close to a friend, not Dren, who had started sitting next to her during meals and asking her questions about Earth with a curiosity that was almost childlike. Not anyone. She kept the vault to herself, a secret folded up inside her chest, right next to the fire, but she started going back. Not every night, maybe once or twice a week. Always in the deep hours when the academy was silent, she would descend the narrow corridor, enter the chamber, and stand before the door. She never tried to open it. She never touched it. She just stood there, breathing quietly in the amber light, feeling that strange sense of recognition, that pull, that whisper at the edge of hearing that said, "Not yet, but soon." Meanwhile, her performance at the academy continued to climb. By the end of the 7th month, she was ranked 4th in Group 7, 4th out of the 14 remaining candidates. She was now outperforming candidates who had started the training with massive natural advantages over her. Dralki with telekinetic gifts, Vorand with armored bodies and 4 arms, Thasari with computational brains. She was beating them not because she was stronger or faster or smarter, but because she never stopped getting better. Her rate of improvement was still accelerating. In some training categories, she was improving so quickly that the Academy's tracking system was generating anomaly flags, small digital markers that said, essentially, "This data is unusual and should be reviewed." Nobody reviewed them. The flags were buried in routine system reports that nobody read. The Academy had been running for 3,000 years, and its bureaucracy was as thick and slow-moving as the dust storms on Corvan 7's surface. Anomaly flags were generated all the time for various reasons, and most of them turned out to be meaningless statistical noise. Nobody had any reason to think that the flags on Kira Vasquez's record were anything special. But deep beneath the Academy, the ancient program was still watching. It had been watching since the day Kira arrived, and the flags were not noise to it. They were signals. Each one was a data point that fit a pattern the program had been designed to detect 10,000 years ago by minds that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy. The pattern was simple, but it was rare. So rare that in all the millennia the program had been running, it had flagged only a handful of candidates as potential matches. None of those candidates had completed the pattern. They had all fallen short in one way or another. Kira's record was different. A record was not just matching the pattern. It was exceeding it. Every week, every day, every hour of training data that flowed into the program's ancient processes brought her closer to a threshold that had never been crossed. The program could not feel excitement, but if it could, it would have been vibrating with it. The threshold had a name, though no one alive knew it. The architects had called it the point of relentless becoming. It was not a single moment. It was a state of being, a continuous, accelerating transformation that showed no signs of stopping, no plateau, no ceiling. The architects had searched the galaxy for species capable of reaching this state. They had tested thousands. They had found none. And so they had sealed the vault and left it waiting for the species that would eventually come. The species that would start at the bottom, be mocked and dismissed and underestimated, and then begin to climb, and climb, and climb, without stopping, without slowing, without ever giving up. They had been waiting for humans. They just did not know it yet. 9 months into the training, the Academy held its annual Crucible. This was the event that every candidate dreaded, and every instructor anticipated with a kind of grim satisfaction. The Crucible was a 5-day trial that compressed every aspect of the Academy's training into a single continuous ordeal. Physical endurance, combat, tactical decision-making, survival, leadership. Candidates were pushed to their absolute limits and then forced to keep going long after those limits had been passed. It was designed to simulate the conditions of a real war, where there was no rest, no resupply, and no mercy. Historically, the Crucible was where the highest percentage of candidates washed out. Some years, a third of the remaining candidates were eliminated during those 5 days. Kira had been preparing for the Crucible since she first learned about it. She had studied the records of previous years, analyzed the common challenges and failure points, and trained her body and mind for sustained performance under extreme deprivation. She had also done something that no one else in Group 7 had thought to do. She had studied the other groups. The Crucible was not a group event. It mixed candidates from all 20 groups together, threw them into randomized teams, and forced them to work with people they had never trained with. This meant that success depended not just on individual ability, but on the capacity to quickly build trust and coordination with strangers from different species. Kira had spent weeks learning the communication styles and body language of every species represented at the Academy. She knew that Voranth responded best to direct physical demonstrations of competence. She knew that Dralki valued calm, logical reasoning and disliked emotional displays. She knew that Thessari needed data before they could trust a decision, and that providing them with clear, quantified information was the fastest way to earn their confidence. She knew a dozen other things about a dozen other species. Small details that most candidates never bothered to learn because they were too focused on their own performance. The Crucible began at midnight on a day that had no warning. Candidates were woken from sleep by a blaring alarm and given 60 seconds to dress and report to the main hall. There, Commander Sen stood on the platform and informed them that the Crucible had begun. He read the rules in his cold, metallic voice. Candidates would be assigned to teams of 5. Each team would be given a mission. Teams would be scored on mission completion, individual performance, and a metric called cohesion, which measured how effectively the team worked together. The lowest scoring teams would be eliminated at the end of each day. Eliminated candidates would leave the Academy immediately. Kira was assigned to a team with 4 candidates she had never trained with. There was a Voranth named Thura from Group 12, a massive female with battle scars across her armored plates and a reputation for aggressive combat. There was a Dralki named Maven from Group 3, quiet and precise with telekinetic abilities that were supposedly among the strongest in the Academy. There was a Thessari named Pixel from Group 16, small even for a Thessari, with nervous eyes that darted constantly and a stutter that got worse under stress. And there was a being from a species Kira had never encountered before, a tall, spindly creature with translucent skin and long, delicate fingers. Its name was Orin, and it was from Group 8. Kira's translator chip identified its species as Velith, a race known for their exceptional memory and their almost complete lack of physical combat ability. The 5 of them stood in a loose cluster as the mission briefing was distributed to their datapads. They had to infiltrate a simulated enemy compound, retrieve a data core from a heavily defended central chamber, and extract to a designated point 20 kilometers away, all within 14 hours. The compound was defended by Academy combat drones programmed to behave like real enemy soldiers. The drones used stun weapons, not lethal ones, but getting hit by a stun bolt meant you were killed and removed from the exercise. If a team lost more than 2 members, the mission was automatically failed. Thura, the Voranth, immediately assumed command. "I take point," she growled. "Dralki, you handle the doors. Thessari, you crack the data core. Velith, stay in the back and do not get hit." Human. She paused and looked at Kira with the same dismissive expression that Kira had seen 100 times before. Human. Try to keep up. It was not the worst team dynamic Kira had ever experienced, but it was far from the best. Thura was a competent fighter, but a poor leader. She thought in straight lines, charge, fight, win, and had no patience for subtlety. Maven, the Dralki, was skilled but withdrawn, barely communicating except when directly addressed. Pixel, the Thessary, was clearly terrified, his multiple eyes blinking rapidly and his small body trembling visibly. And Orin, the Velith, seemed to be in a state of quiet despair, clearly aware that its complete lack of combat ability made it a liability in this kind of exercise. Kira assessed the team dynamics in about 30 seconds. She had seen groups like this before, 5 talented individuals with no glue to hold them together. Left to their own instincts, they would charge in, fall apart under pressure, and fail. What they needed was someone to connect them. Someone who could read each team member, understand their strengths and fears, and weave them into something cohesive. They needed her. She did not challenge Thura's leadership directly. That would have triggered a dominance confrontation, which was how Vorinth resolved disputes, and Kira would have lost that fight in about 3 seconds. Instead, she moved alongside the Vorinth as they began their approach to the compound and started offering observations in a calm, steady voice. "The compound has 3 access points," Kira said, pulling up the schematic on her datapad. "The front entrance is the most heavily defended. The side entrance has moderate defenses but is in a narrow corridor, which takes away Thura's nobility advantage. The service tunnel on the east side has the lightest defenses, but it is narrow. Only one person can move through it at a time. We hit the front. I break through." "You could," Kira agreed, keeping her tone neutral and respectful. "But the front has overlapping fields of fire from at least 4 drone positions. Even with Maven providing telekinetic cover, we would be exposed for approximately 12 seconds during the approach. That is a long time against stun weapons." She let the numbers hang in the air. Thessary responded to numbers, and sure enough, Pixel spoke up, his stutter less pronounced when he was dealing with data. "She is correct. Probability of losing at least one team member during a frontal assault is approximately 63%. Thura looked at Pixel, then at Kira. "So what do you suggest, human?" Kira had been hoping she would ask. "Split approach. Thura and Maven take the side entrance. You draw the defender's attention there. Your combat ability and Maven's telekinesis make you the strongest 2-person fighting unit on this team. While the defenders are focused on you, Pixel, Orin, and I go through the service tunnel. Pixel cracks the data core. Orin uses its memory to navigate us out through the extraction route. I provide cover and handle anything unexpected." There was a pause. Thera was not used to taking tactical suggestions from someone half her size, but the logic was sound, and she could see it. She also noticed that Kira had structured the plan to put Thera in the most dramatic and visible role, leading the main assault. This was deliberate. Kira knew that Vorinth valued being at the center of the action. "Fine," Thera said, "but if this goes wrong, human, it is on you."
"Understood," Kira said.
The plan worked. Not perfectly. Nothing ever went perfectly during the Crucible, but close enough. Thura and Maven hit the side entrance with devastating force. Thura's armored body absorbed stun bolts like they were rain, and Maven's telekinesis ripped weapons out of the drone's hands and sent them clattering across the floor. The defenders shifted to meet this threat, exactly as Kira had predicted, and the service tunnel approach was left with minimal resistance. Kira led Pixel and Orin through the tunnel. It was dark, narrow, and claustrophobic, and Pixel's nervous trembling got worse with every step. Kira stayed close to the Thessary, keeping her voice low and steady. "You're doing fine, Pixel. Just keep moving. Stay behind me. I will handle anything that comes." They encountered 2 drones in the tunnel. Kira took the first one down with a stun grenade rolled around a corner, a move that required precise timing and the kind of calm, steady hands that humans were uniquely good at. The second drone appeared suddenly from a side passage, and Kira reacted before anyone else even registered its presence. She grabbed the drone's weapon arm, twisted it aside, and fired her own stun pistol into its central processor at point-blank range. The drone dropped. Total time, less than 3 seconds. Behind her, Orin the Velith watched with wide, translucent eyes. "How did you react so quickly?" it asked, its voice a soft musical hum.
"I did not react,"
Kira said, checking the corridor ahead.
"I anticipated."
The tunnel layout suggested a defensive position at that junction. I was already moving before the drone appeared. They reached the central chamber. Pixel, his fear momentarily forgotten in the presence of a technical challenge, cracked the data core's encryption in under 4 minutes. It was brilliant work, his small hands dancing over the holographic interface with a speed and precision that made Kira's own steady hands look clumsy by comparison. When the data core was secured, Kira contacted Thera and Maven on the team channel. "Core secured. Beginning extraction." "About time!" Thera's voice came back, accompanied by the sound of a drone being physically thrown into a wall. "We are having fun here, but we cannot stay forever." The extraction was the hardest part. 20 kilometers of rough terrain with Academy pursuit drones hunting them, and a 14-hour time limit that was already half gone. Thera wanted to run straight for the extraction point, but the terrain between them and the point was open and exposed. Pursuit drones would catch them within the first 5 kilometers. Kira studied the terrain map on her datapad and found an alternative route. It was longer, nearly 30 kilometers, but it followed a series of narrow canyons and underground passages that would give them cover from the drones. The canyons were difficult terrain, full of loose rock and sharp drops, but they were survivable if the team moved carefully. "That route adds 10 kilometers, Thera protested. "In this terrain, that could take us 4 extra hours. Getting stunned takes us out of the exercise permanently," Kira replied. 4 extra hours is better than failing." Tara stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Lead the way, human." It was brutal. The terrain was exactly as difficult as she had expected, and the team was already exhausted from the compound assault. Pixel's small legs struggled with the rocky terrain, and eventually Thera simply picked the Thessary up and carried it on one of her broad shoulders, barely breaking stride. Orin, despite its fragile appearance, turned out to have an extraordinary sense of direction. Its perfect memory of the terrain map allowed it to guide them through junctions and passages without a single wrong turn, saving precious minutes. Maven, who had been silent for most of the exercise, began using telekinesis to clear obstacles from their path, moving boulders and stabilizing loose rock formations before the team reached them. It was not flashy work, not the kind of dramatic combat telekinesis that Dralki were famous for, but it was incredibly useful, and it kept the team moving at a steady pace. They were a team now, not 5 strangers thrown together by random assignment, but a team, each member contributing what they did best, covering each other's weaknesses, moving together like fingers on a hand. And at the center of it, quiet and steady, was Kira. She was not the strongest. She was not the smartest. She was not the leader in any official sense. But she was the one who held the team together, the connector, the translator, the one who saw what each person needed and found a way to provide it. They reached the extraction point with 47 minutes to spare. All 5 team members intact. Mission complete. When the results were posted the next morning, their team had the 3rd highest score out of all teams in the Crucible's first day. Not because any one of them was the best at anything, but because together they had been better than the sum of their parts. The second day was harder. New teams, new missions. Kira was separated from the people she had built trust with and thrown in with 4 new strangers. She did it again, read the team, found the connections, built cohesion from nothing. On the 3rd day, harder still. On the 4th day, something close to impossible. By the 5th day, Kira was running on almost no sleep, her body was screaming with pain, and her mind was foggy with exhaustion. But she was still going, still adapting, still getting better, even when everything around her was designed to make her worse. When the Crucible ended, 61 candidates had been eliminated. Kira was not among them. Her individual performance score placed her in the top 15% of all remaining candidates across all 20 groups. Her cohesion scores were the highest in the entire Academy. Not just among humans, not just among her group, the highest, period. No candidate in the history of the Crucible had ever achieved a higher cohesion rating. Commander Sen reviewed the results in his private office, his black eyes scanning the data on his holographic display. He paused when he reached Kira's file. He read it twice. Then he pulled up her complete Academy record, from the first day to the present, and studied the trajectory of her performance. The line on the graph was unmistakable. It started at the very bottom and climbed in a curve that was not just steep but accelerating. There was no plateau, no ceiling, no sign whatsoever that Kira Vasquez was approaching the limits of her potential. If anything, she was getting better faster now than she had been at the beginning. Sen had been running the Academy for over 200 years. He had seen prodigies and geniuses and warriors of extraordinary ability from dozens of species. He had never seen anything like this. This was not talent. This was not natural ability. This was something else entirely. Something that the galactic scientific community had a term for but had never actually observed in a living being. Adaptive persistence. Taken to an extreme that should not have been possible, Sen closed the file and sat in silence for a long time. Then he opened a communication channel to a number that very few people in the galaxy had access to. The channel connected him to the Coalition's Central Intelligence Directorate, and specifically to a division that had no official name and no public presence. Its purpose was to monitor certain phenomena across the galaxy that were classified at the highest possible level. "This is Commander Sen at Apex Academy," he said into the channel. "I need to speak to someone about a candidate and about the vault." There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice, calm and measured, replied, "We have been expecting your call, Commander. We have been monitoring the candidate's record for some time. Tell us what you have observed." Sen told them. He described Kira's trajectory, her rate of improvement, her unprecedented cohesion scores, her ability to adapt to any situation and any team. He described how she had started at the very bottom of her group and climbed to the top third without any of the natural advantages that other species relied on. When he finished, there was another long pause. "Commander," the voice said finally, "we need you to do something. We need you to run the Vault Protocol." Sen's silver skin seemed to grow a shade paler. "The Vault Protocol has not been run in over 800 years. The last time it was attempted, the candidate failed, and 2 instructors were killed in the process. We are aware of the risks. But the data from this candidate's record has triggered flags in systems that have been dormant for millennia, systems that we did not build and do not fully understand. The program monitoring the Vault has identified this candidate as a potential match, the first genuine match in 10,000 years. Sen closed his eyes. When he opened them, the decision had been made. "I will need authorization from the Council." "You have it." "The authorization was granted 6 hours ago, Commander. We have been watching this candidate for longer than you realize." The communication ended. Sen sat alone in his office, staring at the holographic image of a young human woman who had walked into his academy 9 months ago as the weakest, smallest, most underestimated candidate he had ever seen. Now she might be the most important person in the galaxy. He pulled up the Vault Protocol files and began to read. He had a lot of preparation to do, and very little time to do it. Beneath the academy, the Vault's amber light pulsed a little stronger, a little faster, like a heartbeat quickening in anticipation. Something was about to change. Something that had been waiting for 10,000 years. And it all depended on a human who had been laughed at on her first day and had never, not once, stopped climbing. Commander Sen called Kira to his office on a morning that felt no different from any other. The sky outside was the same dull orange. The dust storms were rolling across the distant plains in their usual lazy patterns. The academy corridors hummed with the same sounds of training and discipline that had become the background music of Kira's life for nearly 10 months. She had no reason to think that anything extraordinary was about to happen. When she arrived at the commander's office, she found that she was not alone. Drill Master Kethis was there, standing against the far wall with his 4 arms folded across his massive chest. There were also 2 beings she had never seen before. They wore dark grey uniforms with no insignia and carried themselves with the controlled stillness of people who were used to being in rooms where important decisions were made. One was a Dralki female with silver skin that was darker than Commander Sen's, almost charcoal. The other was something else entirely, a species Kira could not identify. It was tall, impossibly thin, with skin that shifted colors in slow, hypnotic waves. Its eyes were large and completely white, with no pupils or irises, and they were fixed on Kira from the moment she walked through the door. "Candidate Vasquez," Commander Sen said. He was sitting behind his desk, his black eyes unreadable as always. "Sit down." Kira sat. She kept her back straight and her hands still, habits she had developed over months of military training. Inside, her heart was beating a little faster than usual. Being summoned to the commander's office was not normal. Being summoned to find unknown officials waiting was even less normal. "I will be direct," Sen said. "Your performance at this academy has been noted by parties beyond this institution. Specifically, your rate of improvement over the past 10 months has triggered certain automated systems that monitor candidate records for patterns that match specific criteria. These systems are very old. They predate the academy itself. They predate, in fact, the Galactic Coalition." Kira listened. She did not speak. She had learned that when powerful people were telling you something important, the best thing you could do was shut up and listen. What I am about to tell you is classified at the highest level, Sen continued. You are not to discuss it with any other candidate or any person outside this room. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Essen looked at the two officials. The Dralki female nodded slightly. The shifting-skinned being simply stared at Kira with those wide eyes. Beneath this academy, Sen said, there is a structure called the Vault. It was built by a species we call the Architects, who existed long before any civilization in our current galaxy. The Vault has been sealed for approximately 10,000 years. In that time, every attempt to open it has failed. We do not know what is inside. We do not fully understand how it works. What we do know is that the Architects left behind a system, a monitoring program, that was designed to identify a very specific type of individual, a type of individual that the Architects believed would be capable of opening the Vault. He paused. The silence in the room was so complete that Kira could hear her own pulse. That system has identified you, Candidate Vasquez. The words landed in Kira's mind like stones dropped into still water. Ripples spread outward, touching everything, changing the shape of every thought she had. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then simply sat there, processing. Me, she said finally. It was not a question. It was an attempt to make the word real. You, Sen confirmed. Specifically, your record. The pattern of your development since you arrived at this academy matches criteria that the Architects program was designed to detect. We do not fully understand those criteria, but our analysis suggests that they relate to a quality the Architects called the point of relentless becoming, a state of continuous, accelerating improvement that shows no sign of reaching a natural limit. Among all the billions of beings who have been monitored by this system over the past 10,000 years, you are the first to fully match the pattern. Kira's mind was racing, but she forced herself to stay calm, to breathe, to think. What does matching the pattern mean exactly? What happens now? The Dralki official spoke for the first time. Her voice was deep and precise. It means you are given the opportunity to attempt to open the vault. The protocol involves descending to the vault chamber and standing before the door. The Architect's system will evaluate you. If you pass its evaluation, the door opens. If you do not, she paused. Previous candidates who attempted the protocol and failed experienced a phenomenon we do not fully understand. Some were left unconscious. Some suffered permanent neural damage. 2 instructors who were standing nearby during one failed attempt were killed by an energy discharge. You are telling me this could kill me, Kira said. I am telling you this has killed people before, the official replied evenly. You are not obligated to attempt it. This is entirely voluntary. If you decline, you will return to your training, and this conversation will be classified and never discussed again. Kira looked at Sen, then at Kethis. The drillmaster's face was unreadable, but there was something in his small eyes that she had never seen before. It took her a moment to realize what it was. It was fear. Not fear of Kira, fear for her. Somewhere in the past 10 months, the instructor who had once questioned why the Academy accepted humans had begun to care about this particular human. He would never admit it. He would probably deny it if asked, but it was there, visible to someone who had spent her life reading faces and bodies and the tiny signals that people gave off without knowing it. Kira looked at the strange being with shifting skin and white eyes. It had not spoken, had not moved, had simply watched her with an intensity that felt like standing in front of a searchlight. She met those white eyes and held them, and for a moment she felt the same thing she felt when she stood before the vault door in the small hours of the night. Recognition. As if this being, whatever it was, could see something inside her that she herself could not yet see. I will do it, Kira said. Sen nodded as if he had expected nothing else. The protocol will be initiated tomorrow at dawn. Get some rest, candidate. Kira stood, saluted in the academy fashion, a fist pressed to the chest, and walked out of the office. She walked down the corridor, through the training halls, past the barracks, and out onto the landing platform where she had first arrived 10 months ago. She stood in the hot, dusty wind of Corvan 7 and looked up at the orange sky, and she let herself feel, really feel, the full weight of what was happening. She was afraid. Of course she was afraid. She was human, and humans felt fear like they felt everything else, deeply and completely and without apology. But she had learned something about fear during her time at the academy. She had learned that fear was not the enemy. The enemy was allowing fear to make your decisions for you. You could be afraid and still move forward. You could be terrified and still choose to walk through the door. She thought about her family, her mother and father and brother and grandmother in Bogota, squinting in the sunlight. She thought about Admiral Chen, who had sent her here with a letter that said, "We need this." She thought about every human who had come after her, every human who would walk into this academy or any other institution in the galaxy and face the same mockery and dismissal that she had faced. If she succeeded tomorrow, she would change things. Not just for herself, for all of them. And if she failed, well, she would fail trying. That was the human way. She went to her bunk and slept. Deeply, peacefully. The fire in her chest burned steady and warm, and her dreams were full of amber light. Dawn came, and with it a silence that settled over the academy like snowfall. The vault protocol was not public, but something in the atmosphere had changed, as if the ancient structure beneath them was exhaling after holding its breath for 10,000 years. Candidates moving through the corridors felt it, a subtle vibration in the stone floors, a warmth in the air that had not been there before. Most of them did not know what it meant. A few of the instructors did, and their faces were tight with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Kira was escorted to the entrance of the descending corridor by Commander Sen, Drill Master Kethis, and the two unnamed officials. They walked in silence through the academy's deepest levels, past sections that Kira recognized from her nighttime visits, and sections that were new to her. The corridor grew older as they descended, the walls transitioning from modern materials to ancient stone, covered in those spiraling geometric patterns that pulsed with amber light. At the entrance to the final descent, Sen stopped. "From here, you go alone," he said. "The protocol requires it. The system will not activate if others are present in the chamber." She looked at each of them in turn. Sen, with his black eyes and his 200 years of running this academy. The Dralki official, calm and watchful. The shifting-skinned being, still and silent, and radiating that strange intensity. And Kethis. Drillmaster Kethis, who had mocked her on the first day and pushed her harder than anyone else and never once, not even for a second, let her feel sorry for herself. "Drillmaster," she said. Kethis looked down at her, way down. He was still more than twice her height. "Thank you," Kira said, "for not going easy on me." Kethis stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something he had never done before. He placed one of his 4 massive hands on her shoulder, gently, as if handling something precious. "Come back, Vasquez," he said. His deep voice was rough. "That is an order." Kira smiled. Then she turned and walked down the corridor alone. The descent took several minutes. The passage grew narrower as she went deeper, the amber light growing brighter, the geometric patterns on the walls moving more actively, spiraling and shifting as if responding to her presence. The air was warm and carried a faint hum that she felt more in her bones than in her ears. It was like walking into the chest of something enormous and ancient and alive. She emerged into the chamber. It was exactly as she remembered it from her nighttime visits. 10 meters across, domed ceiling. Walls covered in pulsing amber patterns. And the door, that impossible, featureless, infinitely deep door that looked like it had been carved from solidified darkness. But something was different now. The ambient energy in the chamber was higher. The patterns on the walls were moving faster, pulsing in rhythms that seemed almost like language. And the door itself seemed to be vibrating, so faintly that she could only detect it as a slight trembling in the air before it. Kira walked to the center of the chamber and stood there. She did not know what to do. Nobody had told her what the protocol involved, because nobody knew. The previous attempts had all involved candidates simply entering the chamber and waiting to see what happened. Some had tried to touch the door. Some had tried to use their species' abilities, telekinesis, telepathy, brute strength to force it open. All had failed. Kira did not try to force anything. She stood still and breathed and waited, and then the chamber changed. The amber light intensified until it was almost blinding. The geometric patterns on the walls stopped moving and locked into a configuration that seemed to point inward, toward Kira, like 1,000 arrows all aimed at a single spot. The hum in the air rose in pitch until it became a sound, a single, clear note that resonated in the chamber like a bell. And then, in her mind, she heard a voice. It was not a voice in the way she usually understood voices. It had no language, no words, no sound. It was a direct communication, a transmission of meaning that bypassed her ears and went straight to her consciousness. It felt like remembering something she had always known but never thought about. The voice or the meaning or the presence, whatever it was, asked her a question. The question had no words. But if Kira had to translate it into human language, it would have been something like this. Why do you keep going? Not how. Not what do you hope to achieve. Why? The most fundamental question. The question that sat at the bottom of everything, underneath the training and the discipline and the determination and the stubbornness. Why? When every rational calculation said she should have given up months ago, did she keep going? Kira thought about it. She stood in that ancient chamber, bathed in amber light, and she thought about the question with the full depth and honesty that it deserved. She thought about the first day when Kethis had listed everything that was wrong with her species and she had stood there and taken it. She thought about the weeks of being last, of finishing runs minutes behind everyone else, of being thrown to the floor in combat, of seeing her name at the bottom of every ranking board. She thought about the nights in her tiny room staring at the photograph of her family, wanting to cry, wanting to quit, choosing not to. She thought about Voss, who had trusted her intuition when the numbers could not decide. She thought about Dren, who had pressed his massive hand against hers in warrior acknowledgement. She thought about Pixel, trembling in a dark tunnel, who had kept moving because she had told him he could. She thought about Thura, who had said, "Led the way, human," and meant it. She thought about Admiral Chen's ladder, "We need this." And then she thought about something deeper than all of that. Deeper than duty or ambition or the desire to prove herself. She thought about the thing that lived in the very center of her being, the thing she had felt on that first night and every night since, the fire, that stubborn, irrational, unquenchable fire that burned in every human who had ever lived. From the first one who had picked up a sharp rock and decided to change the world, to the last one who would ever draw breath. She could feel the vault waiting for her answer. The ancient intelligence behind the door, patient and vast, and older than any civilization in the galaxy, watching her with an attention that was both terrifying and gentle. Why do you keep going? Kira closed her eyes. She breathed, and she answered, not in words, because the question had not been asked in words, but in the deepest, most honest truth she could find inside herself. Because I am not finished yet, not because she was strong. She was not compared to the others. Not because she was smart or brave or special. She kept going because somewhere inside the human soul, below the fear and the pain and the exhaustion, there was a voice that said, "You are not done. There is more. Keep going." It was not rational. It could not be measured or quantified or explained. It was the thing that had driven humans to cross oceans in wooden boats, to build cities from mud, to fly to the moon in machines held together by math and stubbornness. It was the refusal to accept that the current moment was the final moment. The absolute bone-deep conviction that whatever she was right now, she could be more. The point of relentless becoming. The architects had searched for it across the galaxy. They had tested 1,000 species, and they had never found it because the species that carried it had not existed yet. Humans were young. Humans were new. Humans had only just stepped out into the stars, blinking and stumbling and getting laughed at by every ancient civilization that saw them. But inside every single one of them burned a fire that the architects had only been able to theorize about. The ability to never stop becoming. The chamber exploded with light. Not violent light, not dangerous light. Light that was warm and golden and alive. Like sunrise through clouds. Like the first morning of something new. The geometric patterns on the walls began to move again, but differently now. Not random spirals, but coherent shapes, flowing together into what looked almost like a story told in pure mathematics. The hum in the air became music, deep and resonant and beautiful, like the voice of the planet itself singing, and the door opened. It did not swing open on hinges. It did not slide or retract. It simply ceased to be. One moment it was there, solid and impenetrable and ancient. The next moment it was gone, and in its place was a passage that led into golden light. The light was warm on Kira's skin, warmer than anything she had felt on this cold, dusty planet. It felt like home, like sunshine in Bogota, like her grandmother's hands. Kira walked forward. The passage was short, and it opened into a space that she could not immediately comprehend. It was vast, but its vastness was not physical. It was informational. The vault was not a room. It was a library, a repository. A seed bank of knowledge planted by a civilization that had known it was dying and had decided to leave something behind for the species that would come after. The knowledge was stored in the light itself. As Kira stood there, information began to flow into her mind, not all at once that would have destroyed her, but gently, like water filling a cup. She could feel it, vast and ancient and beautiful. Technologies that the architects had spent millions of years developing. Methods of faster-than-light travel that made current hyperspace technology look like rowing a boat. Energy generation systems that could power entire star systems. Medical knowledge that could extend life, cure any disease, repair any injury, and more. Things she did not have the framework to understand yet, but that she could feel waiting, patient and eternal, ready to be learned. But the most important thing in the vault was not any specific technology or piece of knowledge, it was a message. A final communication from the architects to whoever opened the door. The message was not in words. It was in that same direct communication that the vault had used to ask Kira its question. And translated roughly into human language, it said this: "We built this for you, though we did not know who you would be. We searched the galaxy for a species that embodied what we believed was the highest quality a sentient being could possess, the ability to grow without limit, to become more than what you are, endlessly, relentlessly, joyfully. We did not find that species in our time. So we left this gift and we waited. We waited for you to evolve, to reach the stars, to find this place, to answer the question we could not answer ourselves. Why do you keep going? Because you are not finished yet. You will never be finished. That is your gift. That is what makes you extraordinary. Not strength, not speed, not power. The inability to stop becoming. Take what we have left for you. Share it. Grow. Become. And when you have surpassed everything we ever were, leave something behind for the ones who will come after you. That is how civilizations become eternal, not by lasting forever, by making sure the next ones are better." Kira stood in the golden light of the vault and wept, not from sadness, not from joy, from something bigger than both. From the weight and beauty of standing in a place that had been built 10,000 years ago by beings who had known, somehow, that one day a young woman from Bogota, Colombia, Earth would walk in and open it because she simply could not stop trying. She stayed in the vault for a long time, letting the knowledge wash over her, absorbing what she could, knowing that it would take years, maybe generations, to fully understand everything the architects had left behind. When she finally turned and walked back through the passage, back into the chamber where the door had been, back up the corridor toward the surface, she carried inside her something that was going to change the galaxy. Commander Sen was waiting at the top of the corridor. So was Kethis. So were the two officials. They looked at her face and they knew. They did not need to ask. The amber light that had pulsed beneath the academy for 10,000 years was now glowing through the stone floors, visible everywhere, warm and alive and new. "It opened," Kira said. Her voice was quiet. Her eyes, those amber eyes that her grandmother had given her, were shining with a light that had not been there before. It was waiting for us, for humans. The whole time. Kethis let out a breath that he seemed to have been holding for hours. His massive body sagged slightly, and for the first and only time, the fearsome drill master looked like what he was underneath the armor and the discipline and the 200 years of service. He looked like a person who had been terrified for someone he cared about and was now, finally, relieved. "Well done, Vasquez," he said. His voice cracked slightly on the words. "Well done." The news spread through the academy within hours and through the Galactic Coalition within days. The vault had been opened. A human had opened it. A candidate who had arrived at the academy ranked dead last, mocked by her instructors, dismissed by her peers, and underestimated by every being who saw her, had done something that no one in 10,000 years had been able to do. The galaxy's reaction was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something that the older civilizations were not accustomed to feeling: humility. For 3,000 years, the Coalition's most powerful species had tried to open the vault using their greatest strengths. The Dralki had tried telekinesis. The Voranth had tried brute force. The Thessari had tried computational analysis. All had failed. And then a human, a member of the youngest, weakest, most unremarkable species in the coalition, had walked in and opened it by simply being what humans were. Not the strongest, not the smartest, not the most powerful. Just the most relentlessly, stubbornly, beautifully unwilling to stop growing. In the weeks that followed, Kira worked with coalition scientists and scholars to begin cataloging and understanding the contents of the vault. The work would take decades, maybe centuries. The technologies inside had the potential to transform every aspect of galactic civilization, from energy and medicine to transportation and communication. And at the heart of it all was the architect's message, a message that Kira shared with every species in the coalition. The message changed things. Not immediately. Cultural change never happens immediately. But slowly, the galaxy began to look at humans differently, not as the weak newcomers, not as the soft, fragile, short-lived species that somehow kept getting into trouble. They looked at humans and saw what the architects had seen 10,000 years ago when they imagined the species that would one day open their door. They saw fire, that stubborn, beautiful, impossible fire that no amount of mockery or hardship or failure could extinguish. Kira graduated from Apex Academy at the top of her class. She was the first human to do so. She would not be the last. In the years that followed, more humans came to the academy, and they climbed just as she had, starting at the bottom, being underestimated, and then rising relentlessly, joyfully, endlessly, until the galaxy stopped being surprised and started being inspired. Kira went on to serve in the Coalition Fleet, then in the Coalition Scientific Corps, then in the Coalition Scientific Corps, then in roles that had no precedent and no name. She never stopped growing. She never stopped learning. She never stopped becoming. And on the wall of the Academy's main hall, next to the carved motto that said, "Weakness is a choice. Strength is earned," the instructors added a new inscription, engraved in stone in 100 languages. The words were attributed to the architects, but they belonged to every human who had ever refused to quit. You are not finished yet. Far above Corvan 7, in the vastness of space, the light of distant stars burned steady and bright, and somewhere among them, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow sun, 7 billion fires burned in 7 billion chests, and every single one of them was saying the same thing. More. We can be more. And they were right.